morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues. This is World Cities Day. We're celebrating and for 2020, and it's terrific to have everyone on board today. We appreciate your time on a Friday morning. We have a very interesting day ahead of us in next 90 minutes, a lot to learn, a lot to share. I will be introducing the Secretary General's opening address, followed by the address of our Executive Director, Maimunah Sharif of UN Habitat. I will just make some brief introductory remarks so that we're all on the same page. World Cities Day was designated by the United Nations General Assembly in the 68th session as a day expected to greatly promote the international community's interest in global urbanization, push forward cooperation among countries in meeting opportunities, and addressing challenges of urbanization and contributing to sustainable urban development around the world. The theme this year of general theme of World Cities Day is Better City, Better Life. The theme of the World Cities Day 2020 is valuing our communities and cities. The global observance, which takes place this year in Nakuru, Kenya, is celebrated and has actually already been celebrated given the time difference. And it will be celebrated in literally hundreds, if not thousands of cities around the world, including New York City, where we are today. World Cities Day seeks to promote global interest in urbanization and engender international cooperation to address challenges of urbanization, thereby contributing to sustainable urban development. Over half the world's population live in cities, and this figure is expected to reach 70% by 2050. That means that we're part of a mega trend, as the Secretary General likes to refer to it, something that impacts most of the world increasingly, and it is estimated that by 2050, when member states are developing their global goals and agenda for the following 15 or 20 years, depending on what happens at that time, sustainable urban development will almost encompass all of sustainable development. So as we move towards that trajectory, we need to be zeroing in on specific aspects of what makes development in urban areas sustainable and what makes development generally sustainable given the fact that people are moving to cities, which has an impact on rural areas, different geographies within a country as well as the cities. So getting all of this right is part of what we will discuss today. I have the honor of opening up this session with a message from the Secretary General on the occasion of World Cities Day.
On this World Cities Day.
Over to you. Thank you. Please, we can launch that.
On this World Cities Day, we recognize the extraordinary contribution made by grassroots communities in our cities and towns. The value of communities has been brought into sharp focus during the response to COVID-19. Cities have borne the brunt of the pandemic. Urban areas are already home to 55% of the world's population, and that figure is expected to grow to 68% by 2050. Our rapidly urbanizing world must respond effectively to this pandemic and prepare for future infectious disease outbreaks. With the pandemic often overwhelming public health and support services, communities have organized to keep their neighborhoods safe and functioning, engaging with local and national governments to support the official response. We have seen neighbors shopping and cooking for the sick and elderly, residents cheering health workers, and local volunteer and faith-based groups supporting the vulnerable. Communities are innovative, resilient, and proactive. They play a vital role in building economically, social, and environmentally sustainable cities. Let us maintain the recognition of their value. As we rebuild from the pandemic and engage in the decade of action for the Sustainable Development Goals, we have an opportunity to reset how we live and interact. Local action is the key. When urban communities are engaged in policy and decision-making and empowered with financial resources, the results are more inclusive and durable. Let's put our communities at the heart of the cities of the future.
Chris, I think your mic is muted. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and it's great to hear the message of the Secretary General. We now turn to the Executive Director of UN Habitat, Maimunah Sharif, for her opening remarks of World Cities Day. Over to you, Executive Director.
Thank you very much, Chris, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you globally. I'm very pleased to be here with you today to commemorate the World Cities Day, which is also the conclusion of our Urban October. We have had a month-long series of events and campaigns to highlight the importance of sustainable urbanization. The work, of course, does not end at the end of Urban October, but rather the month kickstart critical conversation and initiative that complement UN Habitat's ongoing work throughout the remainder of the year and the years to come. It forged new partnerships and collaboration in support of our common objective and bring awareness to issues that require urgent action. So Urban October this year has been very unique, to say the least. We are amid a global pandemic where we have witnessed the indefatigable dedication of local government in doing their utmost to protect their residents. As noted by the Secretary General in his policy brief, COVID-19 in an urban world, 90% of the reported cases occurred in cities, and COVID-19 cases are beginning to climb again in many cities, further compromising areas of progress in development. This year, the United Nations is also marking its 75th anniversary, which prompted over 1 million people to voice their concern and hopes for the future of the organization, with emphasis on the importance of multilateralism. On the occasion of the 75th anniversary, UN Habitat, together with UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, and other UN agencies, published the publication titled Shaping the Trends of Our Time. The report highlights the mega trend of urbanization, inequality, aging population, frontier technologies, and climate change, and noting the importance of policy intervention that acknowledge and build upon the interlinkages among the mega trends. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, as Urban October comes to a close, I would like to share with you some of the major campaigns that UN Habitat and partners engage in to raise awareness of critical issues. The Safer City Challenge, which began on the International Day of Peace and conclude tomorrow, focus on 40 days raise awareness on safety in cities and crime prevention in urban areas, and the promotion of citizen actions and innovation for cities. It also provided a platform to amplify innovation in support of urban and safety-related elements of the SDGs. So far, 35 organizations have joined the challenge, as we will hear from speakers today who will discuss local level innovation. And I hope you will all join the Safer Cities Challenge, as we would like to capture your voice and amplify your work. We are in the week 4 of the 5-week Housing for All campaign, which underscores that housing is not just a roof, but is a human right. Because 1.8 billion people worldwide live in inadequate housing, overcrowding, homelessness, and housing precarity. So every year, 2 million people around the world are forcibly evicted, and many more risk the threat of eviction, given the emerging economic crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic. So UN Habitat is working with partners to share solutions to housing challenges, and has also helped to bring awareness to this issue to the film The Human Shelter by filmmaker Boris Benjamin Bertram, bring viewers on a walkabout of human living across the globe. And I encourage you all to watch the full movie, which is available on the UN Habitat website. Tomorrow, 31st of October, which marks the official World Cities Day, the United Nations will launch the World Cities Report 2020, the value of sustainable urbanization. As noted by the Secretary General in his forwarding remark, the report affirms that sustainable urban development is essential to sustainable development and will be a central element of the decade of action. This is why the discussion you will have today on local level innovation in support of the SDGs and the new urban agenda is such an important one. So Aissata, Deputy Commissioner for Operation and Strategic Partnership for the City of New York, will discuss the innovative voluntary local review movement that has given cities a way to highlight their significant contribution to the SDGs. You will also hear from Luis, Director of Mansueto Institute at the University of Chicago, who will show the Million Neighborhoods Initiative. From Luna, a 14-year-old climate activist who has taken matters into her own hands to realize a better future for all. From Saada, whose organization Rethink Food sprang into action at the start of the pandemic to tackle food and job insecurity. James will discuss how to teach for Uganda adapted its learning to meet the needs of its students in Kampala. Eugene, Global Director of Strategic Partnership and Head of Latin America and the Caribbean for the Resilient Cities Network, will discuss their COVID-19 response strategy. And Steve, who has dedicated himself to the art of conflict resolution and peace. All the speakers today will make the argument through their practical work and how critical local action is to the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. To this end, we must be vigilant about staying on track to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So the global pandemic have tested the limit of world's resiliency, uncovered weaknesses, and shown its strength. By keeping our commitment to the SDGs, we will build back better, greener, more equitable, and more resilient. So Agenda 2030 has never been so important, and with only 10 years left, we cannot afford to forget that the SDGs are our opportunity to transform our world. The dedication and innovative measures taking place at the local level will help us to achieve a better world for all. Thank you very much for having me, and I would like to hear the fruitful discussion and the report so that we can take action immediately. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Executive Director, and we very much appreciate your participation in this event, given the time change and the long day that you've had. Thank you very much. It's good to have you as part of this session in New York. We now turn to the Mayor's Office for International Affairs, which is based in New York City and is an important member of the community of the United Nations, in that they are hosting the UN system. And in addition to providing that hosting role, they're very active in the Sustainable Development Goals and have participated in and helped launch a movement of voluntary local reviews, which, for those of you not familiar with that, is an effort for cities to take part in the movement of the Sustainable Development Goals by localizing the various SDGs into their municipal planning practices. And New York City is a leader in this respect. So rather than confining the exercise of the Sustainable Development Goals only to central governments with their voluntary national reviews of their performance on SDGs, the City of New York has helped kick that off at the municipal level, which is now undertaken, I think, lost track of the number, but probably over 1,000 cities worldwide have participated in this initiative to really own and internalize and apply the Sustainable Development Goals. So with that, I turn it over to Aissata Camara, who is the Deputy Commissioner for Operations and Strategic Partnerships in the Mayor's Office. Over to you, Aissata.
Thank you so much, Chris. Good morning, Excellencies and distinguished guests. As Chris mentioned, my name is Aissata Camara, and I am the Deputy Commissioner for Partnerships and Operations at the New York City Mayor's Office for International Affairs. It is an honor to join all of you today. And before I begin, I want to thank the organizers, especially UN Habitat, for bringing all of us together. I also want to extend a warm thank you to Executive Director Ms. Sharif, a key early supporter of the voluntary local review and a champion for the localization of the global goals, as well as a champion for local governments. As we celebrate World Cities Day, it is important to remember that COVID-19 and its effect have really impacted people all around the world. And as a result, it has had a deep impact on cities as the first line of service and resource delivery. Until very recently, New York City was the epicenter of the pandemic in the United States. Day after day, our city experienced thousands of new infections and hundreds of deaths that paralyzed the city in a way never seen before. Since the beginning of the crisis, our city government recognized the need for strong action to ensure the safety of our fellow New Yorkers. These key actions included providing free laptops and tablets for students across the 5 boroughs so that they could take part in online learning. We also launched an aggressive test and trace program in our communities of color that are heavily affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We also opened more than 400 food hubs where any New Yorker could get 3 free grab and go meals. As a result of these strong measures, as well as our city's vital leadership, our infection rates have remained relatively low over the last few weeks. However, our work does not stop here. As we continue to address the challenges of COVID-19 and look to build back better, it is important for cities to continue to share best practices and key strategies towards building a stronger future. At the New York City Mayor's Office for International Affairs, we work to connect local initiatives to global efforts. To illustrate, in April 2015, New York City committed to the principles of growth, equity, sustainability, and resiliency through our groundbreaking One NYC strategy, a model for sustainable development at the local level. This strategy charted a path forward to achieving goals such as lifting New Yorkers out of poverty, expanding access to nutritious and affordable food, and ensuring that those on the front lines of climate change, oftentimes the most vulnerable New Yorkers, are protected against its risks. A few months after One NYC was finalized in September 2015, world leaders gathered at the United Nations in New York City and committed to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Recognizing the synergies between One NYC and the SDGs, our office established the Global Vision Urban Action Platform in December 2015. The Global Vision Urban Action Program uses the common framework of the SDGs to both share our successes and to learn from others on ways we can better serve New Yorkers. After hosting various engagements with both local and global partners through the program, our office wanted to take New York City's commitment to the Agenda 2030 even further. In July 2018, New York City became the first city in the world to submit our SDGs progress report directly to the United Nations, thus demonstrating our commitment to accountability in achieving the global goals. And this is known as the Voluntary Local Review. The voluntary local review is a report that enables local governments to share their progress towards the implementation of the SDGs directly with the United Nations. It allows governments to analyze challenges such as climate change, migration, and even the COVID-19 pandemic. Cities and other local governments must utilize their collective power to advocate for and to create change. This belief was one of the driving forces behind our decision to launch the New York City Declaration on the Voluntary Local Review last year during the General Assembly. At the time when we started, we had 2 dozen signatures. Since then, the voluntary local review has become a movement. We now have hundreds of cities and states from nearly every region of the world that have committed to sharing ideas and using the SDGs to accelerate change in their communities. For example, our colleagues in Accra, Ghana are using the VLR process as a tool for financial development. And in the state of Para in Brazil, the voluntary local review process has helped to ensure that local planning and budgeting instruments are aligned with the SDGs. These are just a few examples of the value that the voluntary local review continues to provide for subnational governments. To ensure the alignment between local strategies and the Agenda 2030, the Voluntary Local Review Declaration consists of 3 key commitments. The first commitment is to identify how existing strategies align with the Sustainable Development Goals. Next, as the second commitment, cities must commit to providing at least one forum where stakeholders can come together to share experiences, lessons learned, and information gathered using the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. And finally, the last commitment is to submit a voluntary local review to the United Nations during the United Nations High Level Political Forum. The declaration emphasizes using existing resources to undertake the voluntary local review process as a way of keeping the threshold for entry low. This was intentional because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the voluntary local review process is meaningful and is one that each city can engage in from where they are, using the time that they have and the resources that they currently possess. We see the voluntary local review process as an opportunity for city voices to also take part, to also be added in the global conversations. Even more so, the VLR is a tool that cities can use to identify ways to improve their service delivery for the benefit of their constituents. And so that is why we are extremely grateful to UN Habitat for their support in translating the Voluntary Local Review Declaration into the 6 working languages of the United Nations, thus bolstering our capacity to reach even more cities. So if you have not already done so, we urge you to join this movement. Cities need to work together today more than ever, because when it comes to battling this pandemic, it is clear that we are all in this together. For all of us, the road to recovery will be a long one, but cities can and must lead the way for the good of the millions who live within our borders. We only have a decade left to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So on this World Cities Day, let us work together to build a better and more sustainable future for all. A future in which no one is left behind. Thank you so much for listening to me. And Chris, back to you.
Thanks so much, Aissata, and it's terrific to have the city help us open this event. We very much appreciate the continued cooperation and your leadership on this issue. I think we're going to shift now to break up the normal Zoom and WebEx and Teams world that many of us are living in with a musical interlude. Please, if we could shift to that. Thank you very much, Luna, for this interlude. As if playing the violin is not enough, Luna is also very involved as a youth climate activist and is responsible for launching Strike. Sorry, if we can shift. Can you hear me?
Good. Hello, everyone.
Okay, terrific. Sorry, that video was lagged a little bit. I was just indicating that as if it's not enough to perform the violin at such a tender age, Luna Abu Yunus is also a youth climate activist and has led an initiative known as Strike for Future, Fridays for Future. And we now provide her with an opportunity to make some remarks. Over to you, Luna.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here and raise the voice of young people on climate change. My name is Luna Yunus, and I'm a climate activist in Fridays for Future movement, or as it's called in Israel, Strike for Future. I started my climate activism last year. When I say my activism, I mean believing climate change, understanding climate change, and working for stopping climate change. Believing in climate change is activism. Learning about climate change is activism. And sharing awareness about climate change is activism. In addition, demanding our rights and needs is activism. One of the actions we do in the movement is protesting in Fridays for our future and the future of billions of people all around the world. I feel responsible to act toward the climate change, to show citizens and people around the world that it is urgent, to wake them up for the issue that is threatening our life. I feel motivated to act more when I see the power of the youth, and I hope you will feel too. I have participated many times in environmental and climate forums where youth from all over the world discuss together and work to make a difference. Because, yeah, this matters the most. Because we are the last generation with a fighting chance to mitigate and adapt to climate change before the point of no return, until reaching 350 ppm and move to renewable energy. I taught myself more on climate science to understand the issue from its roots and help other people understand it in the right way. Unfortunately, people define climate change in a wrong way, and I'm not blaming anyone. We only need to blame the fake news and the education system on that. I think that youth are strong, and they are. I always talk to and meet youth from all over the world who are inspired to take action. Their motivation is often that they face environmental circumstances in their life that made them work and act to help their community overcome them. They also realized that these circumstances are threatening their life and other people's life. Others chose to take action after learning about the risks behind climate change and again understand it right. I come from a minority in Israel, and it's important to me to act so I can help my community know more about climate change and save it all from it, taking into consideration that minorities are often the most affected by crisis. So how can we contribute, adults and youth? One of the main things is to protest, to show the governments that we are standing for our rights and needs and demanding them in this situation to close industries and put sustainability as our core mission for the future. By protesting, we share awareness to the public towards climate change and show them the importance of reducing carbon emissions in their consumption. By protesting, people, and especially youth, realize that they are not alone. There we alter the agenda and start a debate. Furthermore, protests provide an essential voice for minority groups. I think that the success in achieving our climate goals in the SDGs depends on the youth, because the youth are the future. And I do believe this success will be resulted by, first, the knowledge and the understanding of climate change and learning about it. Second, the belief that we are capable of making a change and acting is very important and crucial. And third, the support of the adults. Adults need to know that youth are capable, can do, and act even more than them. I meet youth that are very inspired and motivated. I'm also one of them. They can do the impossible to have an impact. However, they face in the middle people that do not take them seriously, that doubt them. I'm calling you firstly, the youth, to learn more and educate yourself about the climate issues, and then believe in yourself that you can act for it. And secondly, the adults, to participate, encourage the protest, encourage our youth, and raise their awareness. And of course, give all of your support. It's very important to see how individuals can mobilize and inspire change. The world has just witnessed a 16-year-old launch a global climate movement that is inspiring millions. And finally, most importantly, don't forget, you are not too young to make a change. Thank you. You're muted.
Sorry, Chris, I think you might be muted.
Can you hear me? Thanks. Yeah, I'm not sure why it automatically goes off despite me not doing any changes, but that's the challenge of WebEx. Luna, thank you so much. I appreciated your comments and also your inspiration. I think what you've done is to basically build a network of young people who, as you say, are recognizing that they're part of the solution and are not going to wait for the policies and programs and budgets of older people, but are going to take matters into their own hands and begin to learn about the issue and also move forward in a way that is not alone, that you're operating using social media, internet platforms to mobilize in a way that was not possible for our generation. So we look forward to listening as well as taking note of the priorities that you are generating through your networks as part of our efforts, particularly in the United Nations, but beyond, to advance this. I would like to add that our Secretary General is very committed to ensuring that youth are involved in every part of the conversation of UN system. There is the Secretary General has a designated youth envoy who actually participates as an official member of the Security Council, United Nations Security Council negotiations, as well as the General Assembly. So the Secretary General at his level is trying to open up spaces for youth in all parts of member state and intergovernmental processes as part of his commitment to inclusive multilateralism. So I just wanted to tie in that what you're doing may seem very far away from what we're doing, but actually they're really connected. With that, I'd like to shift now to a friend and colleague, Luis Bettencourt, who's the inaugural director of the Mansueto Institute for Urban Innovation at the University of Chicago. We collaborated on several things, including an initiative in October 2019, exactly a year ago. It seems like 100 years ago, to bring thinkers together and activists and policymakers around issues of urban innovation, and particularly looking at this issue of sustainable development and sustainable urban development from the perspective or the unit of intervention of the neighborhood. Not necessarily the central government, not necessarily the city, but zeroing in on neighborhoods. And this is very much akin to our theme today of valuing communities and cities. So Luis, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. I hope I'm coming across. So happy World Cities Day, everybody, from cold Chicago. Good morning, bon dia, as the Secretary General might say. So I wanted to just share with you a few words, which I hope will be words of hope and resilience, but also of many possibilities that are happening in this difficult time that will change the way we do our work and how we can accelerate the work towards making our world more sustainable and our cities better. So as Chris said, my name is Luis Bettencourt. I'm the director of an institute at the University of Chicago that we think is a new kind of institute. The institutes like this proliferating throughout the world in many universities and cities, and it's really dedicated to understanding cities better, more fundamentally, through the voice and the experience of people and communities, but also, of course, using this avalanche of new methods, new data, new opportunities that allow us to understand that cities are fundamentally sets of relationships that happen over space, and they're essentially places where change happens. So because of all that, it is in cities and in neighborhood communities that I believe we have the better hope, the best hope, to implement the SDGs and create a more sustainable world. So I think when we last met, as Chris said, at WOOF, I think we thought we were in a different world, a world in which we had more time, when we had each other sort of at arm's length, so to speak, and that has completely changed. So in the time that intervened, we've been doing two main things. On the one hand, we shifted a lot of our work to try to understand the pandemic and to understand the pandemic, particularly in urban environments, big and small, and how we're responding. The idea is that it's a new world for that too, that we're observing an unprecedented effort of collaboration throughout the world, as you might have seen, that never happened before with any other disease, for creating information, for testing, for policy strategies, for a scientific race for cures and mitigations and therapies that really is changing how we are addressing this challenge, but also is changing the way we see it and understand it. One of the things we see, of course, is that in many of our more fragile communities, the pandemic has hit particularly hard. And we've had studies and collaborations that really indicate that in a city like Chicago, in a city like New York, but also in cities like Mumbai and in cities of the African continent, really poor neighborhoods with fewer services, with more crowding, tend to really take the brunt of what is going on. And this is really unacceptable, but it's also another expression of the challenge of sustainable development. So I think the lesson from all this, besides that we'll learn to fight this disease and arrive in a better world at the other end of it, is that we cannot have the illusion that politics or the economy is a disembodied thing. It's really part of people's lives, of our communities, of the social network that moves us every day, and that from that point of view, the basis is how we make better cities and create better lives so that we can have prosperity, equity, and sustainability. I know that sometimes the numbers are bleak, but I want to assure you that there's a scientific revolution and a revolution of power of people and communities to fight this disease, and we'll arrive at a better place. The other part that I want to share with you is around the idea of million neighborhoods. So million neighborhoods is a concept that we developed through many years through our work mostly with informal settlement communities in the context of Slum Dwellers International and other NGOs. And it really tries to bring together sort of these two very rarefied worlds of academic and research with community organization and data collection. The idea is that together we can really create a movement, a set of new understandings, a set of new tools that allow us to understand how cities and communities can develop, but also to put in the hands of communities and their cities sort of the best tools that are coming through technology and science, and lead to models of planning and policy that not only are more true to the nature of cities and the priorities of communities, but also rebalance, as it were, the power structures of development, of economics, and of development. So what we've been doing, and again, these are words of hope, that what we see is that there's a tremendous revolution in our ability to create information throughout the world. Slums are no longer zones of silence. They're zones where we're creating sort of the evidence, and we're envisioning the future in myriads of new ways, where we also have incredible information coming from remote sensing and other technologies that allow us to see every detail of the built environment, allowing us to think about how the built environment, services, and our relationship to all that is changing. So go and look at it. It's called millionneighborhoods.org. We're mapping the entire world one city block at a time, so one neighborhood at a time. And what we've been doing in this time is really to dedicate our efforts in collaboration with a few target communities to do these citywide scans of the kind of infrastructure and transformations that would deliver the SDGs and deliver, better communities and better cities. And the idea is that there's really, as we do this, we're understanding that there's a whole spectrum of opportunity and need. Slums are not just dense neighborhoods. There's a lot of informality that's actually not dense at the periphery of cities. And that actually tends to be more common in fast-growing cities, particularly of the global south. But that there sort of has to be a contextually appropriate response that's place-based, that is in collaboration with communities and cities, and that uses the best knowledge to take us through. All this is possible and can create a massive collaboration throughout the world in which in each city, in each neighborhood, we can learn from each other, we can accumulate that knowledge, and we can accelerate the process of sustainable development, perhaps with an eye to 2030. So with that said, I want to just give you some words of hope, wish you a great and hopeful World Cities Day, and hope that you trust that the knowledge that we're creating, the science, the collaborations, the strength of our communities, the resilience of our cities will carry us through. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. And it's really nice to have you as part of this discussion today. And I'm grateful for these interventions, particularly the data piece. I would cite that on the chat for those that are participating, please look at the links that were provided by Luis's colleague, Grace. That's a wealth of information. And as Luis has said, really a systematic effort to work block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood at a global level, and make that data available to the people living and working in those areas, but also to make it available for urban planning and sharpen the tools in the context in which we're working, and not rely purely on municipal-based evidence, but complement that with neighborhood data. Thanks, Luis. We now turn to Eugene Zapata, who is the Global Director of the Strategic Partnerships and Head of Latin America and the Caribbean for the Resilient Cities Network. Eugene, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Very good. I would to for like to have a very for me. Christina can help me share. Yeah.
Eugene, if I can just ask, if I just interrupt briefly, if everyone on the chat could take off their videos, I think the connection may be a bit better for Eugene to make his presentation. Thank you, just temporarily, thanks. Go ahead, Eugene.
So I'll just start, but please let me know if I can share the screen or if someone can share the presentation that I sent last night. If not, it's okay. So so what have we done? I mean, I'm going to share with you what a city network has been doing in the context of the pandemic. We are an organization of 97 cities, continents. There we go. If we can, yeah, move to the first slide, please. That's you remember the Resilient Cities program. Resilience for capacity stresses that that can affect their future. And what we did is that we created in these 7 cities, there were 100, but the 97 active, we did an office of urban resilience called the Chief Resilience Office. This was an institutional field that did exist. We thought that the step toward building resilience is looking to just of the future. I don't understand resilience is not only about treating the person naturally provoked, but also those. So the CROs, as we call them, resilience officers, and local around the world. New York is one of our member cities, as Aissata has shown. One New York city of New York. And when the pandemic came, what happened? All of our CROs were very concerned to show up to this crisis. And we did a very, very survey back in March, and what the results of this were. And this was the basis for responding main finding. Even of the pandemic, the chief resilience officers already knew that most of the effort had to be focused on COVID. Different recovery.
Eugene, I'm sorry to interrupt again. I think it might be better, we can hear you better if you just go off your video just for the rest of the presentation and then come back on at the end. Thanks.
Perfect. There we go. Is it better now? Okay.
Much better, thank you.
Okay, so the second finding was about the fact that the pandemic showed up against a backdrop of existing shocks and stresses. And the Secretary General and the Executive Director mentioned some of the mega trends that we're living today, you know, on inequality, climate change, frontier technologies, and all these topics that were already here. So it's not because of the pandemic shifting priorities that the other existing shocks and stresses and problems that were already there disappeared. So, you know, this came on top of an already quite difficult cocktail of challenges that cities worldwide were facing. The third finding is that the existing vulnerabilities that we had already been trying to tackle came with new ones, okay? And especially very urgent ones like access to food, mobility, that were really very sharply affected because of the pandemic. The fourth finding was that we were not going, as resilience experts around the world, we were not going to treat this crisis from a sectoral perspective. This is not only about health, this is not only about mobility, this is not only about economic livelihoods, it's about everything happening at the same time. So the chief resilient officers are in a very, very good place to address these issues from a very different access point in an integrated manner, and delivering a broad range of solutions with a broad range of partners to this multi-sectoral pandemic. So in the next slide, we can see the finding number 5, and I love the interventions that we just heard from Luis and from Luna, because this is about people-centered crisis. This is extremely affecting people's lives on a day-to-day nature, and it's also place-based. The way the pandemic has shown up has been extremely territorial, and it has been urban. So as the executive direction mentioned. So this is a very good thing not to forget, that we need to focus on place-based and people-centered solutions. The sixth finding is that something we already knew, but that came more and more evident than ever, is that cities already had a gap in data, in funding, and in capacity. We know that, especially in the developing world. I am heading the network's work in Latin America and the Caribbean, and this is something that has been ongoing, one of the already worrying situations before the pandemic. And the seventh finding is that in order to bridge these gaps and try to find solutions to all these issues, cities need more than ever to have platforms for sharing ideas. No city can afford technical expertise, consulting, or any kind of service to confront the pandemic today. So access through our platform for sharing ideas is free. You know, cities all over the world being able to connect on a day-to-day basis to see what has worked and what has not worked. Today, it's a very, very good way for cities to find solutions instead of trying to doing it alone. So let's look at the next slide, please. What did we do after we did this survey? Was conducted in 100 cities around the world, as I said. So we came up with this solution back in April, which is called our C2R platform, Cities for a Resilient Recovery. What does that mean? In the next slide. The first thing is we are providing tools. And let me say that the Cities for Resilient Recovery program that we launched is open to all the cities around the world, not only to our member cities, which is quite interesting because we are a network that has, as I said, resilient offices all over the world, but those cities that do not have them can also access this information. So the first set of solutions is a toolkit. We call it the Toolkit for a Resilient Recovery. It was published in June, and it is being updated. It has 3 specific tools: a recovery impact assessment, a recovery resilience assessment, and a recovery needs assessment. So these are methodological tools that can help cities to address recovery. The next set of, in the next slide, please, the next set of actions that we put in place was training. We are delivering an 8-week free training for city officials around the world that is called Resilience Fundamentals, and that has a specific focus on COVID. This was developed by the Chief Resilience Office of the City of Melbourne in Australia. It had already existed before the pandemic, but we adapted it and strengthened it, opening up its contents to other non-member cities, as I mentioned, since the pandemic. And that is also open to cities interested across the world. The third set of actions, in the next slide, please, is a community of practice. So we are 100 cities, but the problem goes way beyond. So we set a community of practice where city officials from outside of our network can also join. This is an online community and it's a closed community where it's a free space, a safe space where cities can ask difficult questions and get answers. It has been very useful. Like, I've seen how a chief resilient officer from a city in Latin America asks a question and gets answers in 3 minutes from 10, 12 cities across the world on specific issues like how to work, for example, with sports infrastructures in the context of COVID, of how to open up again bars and restaurants, that kind of things. So that has worked very well. Also, in the next slide, please. We created with the World Bank a speaker series. We're already on the 31st edition of that, which is called Cities on the Front Line. These have been very, very successful. It's a weekly webinar with at least 2 cities and 2 experts from around the world sharing information on specific topics: aging cities, mobility, children and schools, distance education, women in public transportation, security in households during the confinement. Things that have been new to all, because the world just changed in a very unexpected way. And we believe that our Cities on the Front Line speaker series has been a very good place for people to share their ideas, to ask the right questions. We are about to finalize for this year our series, I think with edition number 35, but we're already thinking with the World Bank on continuing next year, depending on how things evolve. The next slide is on our last tool for the program. It's on providing intelligence to everyone that wants to see what cities are doing on COVID. And we partnered with the University of Manchester to do a weekly or bi-weekly, I think bi-weekly briefing on COVID-19. And this has been very useful also because it's being fed by the information that is shared in the online community, that is being shared in the speaker series. So it's here where we systematize and capitalize all the information that we gather through the other set of events and programs. The next slide, please. So at the end, what we see today is that 83% of our cities are working to embed resilience into the recovery plans. We really believe that there's no way back. We cannot go back to sectorial approach to urban development. We have to think in an integral way, go beyond the typical division of budgets and planning, and look at the challenges of cities in a cross-sectoral way. And not only, this is not only a governmental agenda. This is an agenda that has to involve other actors and stakeholders in the territory, and also other levels of government, as has been expressed by my previous colleagues that intervened. Another thing that we saw is that 80% of our member cities believe that it's social equity, the top priority of recovery. This is very interesting because not our cities are not really focusing on the health issue only. We have seen that the health, as most risks and vulnerabilities of cities, this health pandemic has affected the most vulnerable. So we have to really focus on the most vulnerable populations. And finally, 7% of our cities have been using our platforms for sharing our ideas, meaning that no one can do it alone, and that today the world is more global than ever, and the pandemic has shown how connecting wherever you are is the way forward. Finally, I think I have a final slide. This is what we do. The Resilient Cities Network, it's the world's urban resilience network, trying to build a safe and equitable world. We are partnering with most of the organizations and other city networks that are working on this space. I'm extremely happy to be here on World Cities Day, hoping that as a city network, we can help everyone on the call. I will share on the chat the access to our online tools and platform. I'm happy to continue the conversation with all of you. Thank you very much.
Eugene, thanks very much. I'm pleased that we were able to secure the connection, and we could hear you really fine once the video went off. Not that we didn't want to see you, we just really wanted to hear you. So thank you for very insightful responses and comments. And a lot to digest, very rich content. Thank you. We now turn from Latin America to Africa. We'll be hearing from James Arianatwi, the Chief Executive Officer for Teach for Uganda, shifting from the networking and resilience space to education, and of course, the important element of the education in the context of COVID. Over to you, James.
Hello, I hope you can hear me very well. My network is not that
very much. That's a good connection. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pleasure to be here, and I wish everybody, World Habitat, a good World Habitat Day. And I think it's awesome that the UN has organized this, and my first time to attend, so it's my joy. And I feel like there is a lot that education contributes to this, and actually I believe that especially Sustainable Development Goal number 4, if it's not achieved, then it will be difficult to really have healthy, thriving cities and communities. So that's why I think I'm glad that you've invited someone as an education entrepreneur to come and share this, and I'm so grateful for that. I think I want to start from, if anybody is happy to let me share my slides. I couldn't email them for some reason, but I would love to share like a bit so to give some context, if that's okay. Okay, great. Let me make sure I have them ready. Okay, great. Are you able to see the slides?
Yes, we can see. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So Teach for Uganda, I mean, before I even jump ahead about, Teach for Uganda, I would love to share a bit about myself. So we realized in Uganda, as you will see the numbers here, are shocking, that by literally by 2050, 100 million people in Uganda. We are 40 million today. So 100 million people. Right now, our median age, this is in Uganda alone, our median age is 16, meaning that right now at 14 million, we have half the nation is under 16. Half the country is under 16. 15 million of those children are in school because they are children. I mean, they are still teenagers, and then and children, and then 11 million of those are in primary school alone. Primary school alone, and we have seen that as they progress through primary school, 65% drop out before they actually finish grade 7, which allows them, basically, it's the level where they transition to secondary school. And then when you look at the competences of reading and writing and arithmetic and comprehension, the numbers are staggering. So we realized, personally, as a young man who had grown up in rural southwestern Uganda, had all these challenges that SDGs are trying to work on. So the plane passing over my building. So I hope you can hear me. Including health. So I had lost my dad to HIV and AIDS, my mother to cancer, and my siblings to other preventable diseases such as measles and rotavirus. So as an orphaned young man, I had to go through so much, including traveling miles to find a sponsor from the government, and then finally getting on this trajectory to get my education. But also, as I was traveling all that time, my idea was, let me get to the city, and maybe in the city, I'll find someone who would support me. And luckily, I landed on the first lady of my country, which took 3 months, but finally she was able to send me to school. So as you can imagine, as you see, and this is across Africa, Uganda is one of the youngest, the countries with the youngest population now, second youngest after Niger. But across Africa, these burgeoning young people that are there, and they are migrating to the cities. And if they don't get the opportunities in the cities, they actually are, as you've seen on the news, swimming across the oceans, trying to get better opportunities in Europe and other places. So the idea of education and helping us achieve better communities and cities is very, very important. And so that's why we focus on education. And we see that education is one of the leading, I think, tools to economic development for our nations. And we realize that we must tackle this by young people for young people. So, and you see, as I will share quickly, both even the health indicators as well, that if we are to actually move a health needle in our country and also across Africa, we have to think through how we educate our young people. What type of education are they receiving? Are they in school and not learning? Are they learning the skills that are enabling them to be able to solve their both community challenges as well as developing as citizens? And the issue of social cohesion, as you well know, you have seen that some of our countries, there's high rates of instability, high rates of crime in some cases, and of course poverty. We have to mention that. And so because of that, we've realized that if fundamentally we are able to provide a quality education, right? And after the research by Boston Consulting Group, which is our partner recently, they showed that literally macro estimated that the return of investment of an educating a young child between the ages of 5 to 25 brings the return on investment between 9 to 37%. And so it's huge. And then if a nation doesn't educate its own children, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa, adults without primary education are 1.5 more times less likely to support democracy. And so you can see that these are the challenges that we are trying to tackle. But also we do believe that if they are educated, if they have the resources, then we will have what you've mentioned in your as the opening remarks of our Secretary General of this holistic community development, local action. And the way we went about it was that we created this movement of young people for young people. So at Teach for Uganda, we hire, as our mission does, says that one day, and for us, one day means in 25 years to years old, that they are able to attain an excellent education. And the way we go about it is by developing this movement of young leaders to transform the future of education, to give each child an opportunity to thrive. And so we've seen that there's always this dichotomy between the children who have more and they are placed on that path, the yellow path, as you can see, to broader opportunities. So these are children of high income, come from high income communities, have access to city opportunities. Most times in Africa, you find that cities offer these more opportunities compared to rural communities. And that's why we see the rural-urban migration is huge in our countries. And because not only are their parents looking for opportunities, but they also believe that they will get better opportunity for education and resources and access to power. And then there are these children who we find that not only are they coming from low-income communities, but also rural. And we've seen for our countries, rural education most times is provided by government, which is in my case, and then at that rate, they are not able to really compete with their counterparts in the city. So our aim and our vision is basically to bridge that gap, to ensure that children who are on that red line are put on a path and dealing with all the systemic, what we call systemic injustices of lack of nutrition, for example, of walking miles to get to school, of being a refugee, for example. Uganda, by the way, also the other caveat is that Uganda is one of the #1 hosts of refugees in Africa. So we have about 1.8 million refugees in this country, and about, I think, 30% recently by UNICEF, of those are actually children, young people. So they are also migrants. So in Kampala, you see that we have, migrations from the Congo, the DRC, from Sudan, from Eritrea, and from all these countries surrounding us. So for us, we do believe that in the best way, if they are migrated to the city, if they are in our communities, what do we do? The basic thing we could do is provide them an excellent education. And so that's why we say that in 25 years, that when our children are 25 years, they will have attained their highest level of education that they can. They will have acquired leadership and entrepreneurial skills that empower them to access and create opportunities. They will persevere in the face of adversity and mobilize communities to solve their own problems. And they will also be responsible, honest, and empathetic leaders, reliable, who are able to inspire the next generation to greatness. And so this is our vision, and this is where I think I will stop here and then go into why we created this movement and why it matters for climate change and climate action. So what we do at Teach for Uganda, let me share a bit. So we who are called fellows, and then they are hired, trained, and skilled, and then they are placed in these communities that they teach children, and they are put on a path to success. And then after that, when they finish this 2-year fellowship in the communities, we don't just stop there. They are then join our alumni network, And within that alumni network, we are supporting them. And some of us want to go into training and skilling other teachers. Some want to go into politics and policy. Some want to go into entrepreneurship. So we support them and we ensure that they are able to succeed. Majorly, I would say that how does this apply to climate change and climate action, especially when it comes to developing resilient cities and communities? We believe that unless we are able to tackle this challenge at the root cause, we are not able to create leaders actually who value cities and communities to be able to thrive. And so our hope is that by training these young people, they are becoming conscious. So for example, we have a young man, Charles Obore, who started a climate action program in his classroom in rural Uganda, and was training these young people. Let me, if I can move forward ahead and show you a bit. So here, where they train these young people in their communities to ensure that they are able to know that by conserving the environment, by being able to take care of our communities, then we will be able for us to deal with the challenges of environmental degradation, the challenges of food security, which are some of the reasons why even most people migrate to the cities, and then be able to nurture a young generation of leaders who understand both the issues that we face as a nation, but also as regards to climate change. Now, last one, I know that we don't have time. When COVID-19 hit, there was a huge challenge because the children were out of school, and then teachers were sent home. So we were the only organization that actually stayed in these rural communities, because now, even as you see, this caused a challenge. I want you to understand this. Even the people in rural communities were afraid of coming to the city because they saw that the cities were becoming an epicenter for COVID-19. So now the migration actually had been halted because there was a lockdown. So there was no movement of anything between the city and the communities. So what we did, we came up with what we call the community cluster learning pods, and we were able to leverage DHL, one of our partners, DHL, and they were able to deliver our materials to these communities, and they were able to teach these children. Our fellows would teach 5 to 10 children spaced out in a community because it's a village, and they would space them out and they would wear their masks and they would be outside, and we have not had a case of COVID from our communities that we work with in the 2 districts of Luweero and Eastern Uganda, Mayuge. And lastly, this model now has been adapted by the World Bank and all these UNESCO, and has been put on page 15, if you have a chance, of Save Our Future white paper that is now being circulated across all the countries, because this model that we piloted has actually worked and allowed children in Africa, especially in rural communities, to be able to learn and also be able to socially distance, stay in their communities, and be able to thrive even within the pandemic. And we are now working with government to ensure that maybe, hopefully, we can scale it. I'll end there. I know there is a lot to discuss. I guess for me, the last few quick ones would say that we need to invest in our young people. One, to ensure that they are the ones who are leading the charge, because they are the future, as our young person said. And then we need to be able to create a generation of leaders who understand the ramifications of urban city migration and how we ensure that we create leaders who value our cities and our communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it. I'm glad the connection was very clear, and your slides and your narrative was very powerful. Thank you. And I very much appreciate the context that you provided with Uganda, which is distinct and a country with perhaps one of the highest urbanization rates, particularly rural to urban migration, but complemented with significant hosting of migrants from the different countries that you had mentioned, and over several generations. This is not a new phenomenon. And it's encouraging to see some parallels with what Luna's doing in terms of voice and agency for youth, having them be in the driver's seat for their access to education and their leveraging of education through fellowships for a number of initiatives, potential future leadership. So very, very helpful, James. Thank you. We will now turn with 2 more speakers, and bear with us, and then we're going to try to open this up a little bit for discussion. We now shift to from the Ugandan context. We're really spanning the world today. From here in New York City, Sada Amadou, who is the Policy and Research Director for an organization called Rethink Food. This is a really interesting group that she will explain much more, that we've had the pleasure to work with UN Habitat, as we have an office in New York City. In addition to global headquarters in Nairobi, our office in New York has reached out to a number of organizations and enjoys a good collaboration with Rethink Food. So in the context of COVID and the SDGs through the prism of food, we'll now hear from Sada. Over to you.
All right. I hope you can all hear me.
Very much so.
Okay, thank you. All right. As Chris said, my name is Sada Amadou, and I work for a Brooklyn-based organization called Rethink Food. I think I shared some slides, but I'll still explain regardless. But so we were founded in 2017. We originally had I guess we wanted to use excess food as a food security strategy. And the idea was simple. We will pick excess food from different partners in the restaurant industry, hotels, some urban farms, and corporate cafeterias, including the UN building, actually. And the idea is that after we retrieve the excess food, we will then take it back to our commissary kitchen in Brooklyn, which will be converted to new meals to be distributed to the food insecure through our different community-based organization partners. So that's what we were doing prior to the pandemic. But I believe on March 13th, everything changed. All of a sudden, we were getting a lot of calls from our partners, and a lot of partners we have never even heard from that had all of a sudden had a lot of excess food because everybody had to shut down, and people had maybe a day or two to either eliminate maybe from anywhere from maybe 10 pounds to hundreds of pounds of food. So we received a lot of donations around that time. But one thing we also did notice during this time was the fact that a lot of our restaurant partners were also shutting down, along with most restaurants, just because people couldn't stay afloat just by doing takeout. And initially that wasn't even allowed. So at the end of March, we started something called the Restaurant Response Program. And the Restaurant Response Program has three main goals. One, keep, thank you, Naomi. All right, who is doing, let's see. Perfect, this page would be good, thank you. So at the end of March, beginning of April, we started something called the Restaurant Response Program. It had three main goals. One, keep restaurants open. Two, either try to create new jobs or sustain jobs that were lost in those restaurants. And three, obviously continue to feed originally the food insecure people that we were already feeding, and also the newly food insecure brought on by all the economic factors of the pandemic. And that's what we've been doing since then. We've now rebranded it to what is now called Rethink Certified. But just in context, so we went from doing an average of 8,000 meals per week to, at some point during the pandemic, at 1 week, we were averaging like 90,000 meals. So we went from working with like about 20 community-based organization partners to working with approximately 75 community-based organization partners. Anywhere from people who are dealing with senior citizens in different housing organization buildings to just young people who all of a sudden have especially a lot of people in the hospitality industry who have lost jobs and maybe had to like improvise just based on limited funds and such. But one of the reasons that I was very glad that we were invited to speak about this, because while maybe we did, Matt didn't necessarily start looking at the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the great things about Rethink and our mission is the fact that we're actively always working towards some of those goals, starting with, I believe, just the first one alone, the no poverty part. So when the pandemic started and we pivoted to Restaurant Response Program, the idea is that we'll give restaurants the grants to then make the meals for us. So we chose, right now, we're currently working with approximately 25 restaurants, and the idea is we'll provide them up to $250,000 a year to supplement part of their operational budget, so that they will make anywhere between like 100 meals per day to, let's say, 500 meals per day to then distribute to different community-based organization restaurants. So we've been actively doing that. We've created about 80 jobs, or we ended up retaining some of those jobs just by activating and keeping some of those restaurants afloat. And then obviously, as I mentioned, for the goal number 2, which is like the zero hunger, as I mentioned before. So not only did our operations increase, since we started in 2017, we've made 2 million meals so far, and 1 million of those 2 million was made between June and right now. So we, like I mentioned, I remember when we sent the email that we've officially made 1 million meals, and then just maybe about 3-4 months later, we had already reached another million. So food insecurity has increased a lot in New York. I believe it went from maybe 1 in 8 people in New York to approximately maybe around 1 in 6 now. So the numbers keep going up. I've seen numbers as high as people saying like about 2 million people are going to be currently food insecure in the city as well. And then one of the ones that I really want to touch upon, the SDGs, is the 17, which is the partnerships for the goals, which is from anywhere from our partnership to UN Habitat and attended events like these and seeing what other either other nonprofits in the food sphere or just different innovative ideas that are happening around the world. Because I think I was just texting some of my colleagues that I was wondering how Teach for Uganda pivoted during the pandemic, because I have half siblings in Ghana and they haven't been able to go to school for the past like 6 months. So it was interesting to like hear some of these ideas. So even though it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with food, we're still very great to hear about partnerships. But all in all, this is most of our impact. We were very focused on SDG number 1, number 2, 8, and 17 are most of the ones that we're very focused on. We want to make like simple, healthy meals so that people can have access to food with dignity and all that, and be in a good well-being. So that's about it. All right, thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone else. And I was glad to hear some of your presentations as well.
A lot of thanks. Very interesting stuff. And I really like the way the organization has adapted to COVID. And I think we've heard that from Eugene and just about everybody else, what we were doing, all of us a year ago, and what we're doing now is the same in many respects, but we've kind of pivoted in a way to adjust to the situation and also to adapt to needs. And I really like the fact that you had this network of restaurants that you were working on as to source food, and then use that food for the purposes of giving it to those that lacked meals, and at the scale that you're talking about. So you adapted in terms of increasing production from 8,000 to 90,000. But you also realized that that source that you were getting from restaurants was as much in need of help as the people that didn't have food. So beginning to work with them, and particularly to support a few of them on an experimental basis for the purposes of producing food for everybody, allowing them to stay open and create jobs at the same time that you're getting food to people. This is really a sign of adaptation. So congratulations to you and Matt, and please extend our greetings to him. I'd like to shift now to our last speaker, Stephen Aelo is the founder and director of Debate for Peace, and has been doing work on peace at the local level, integrating this and leveraging it within the SDGs. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you. Am I coming out clear?
Very much so. Thank you.
Okay, so just let me know if I need to switch the camera off, but I'm going to leave it on for now.
So far, so good.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm actually from Brooklyn, which is one of the most diverse cities in the world. But it was years before I had any friends who weren't Jewish like myself. And that's because you could basically drive around and kind of see where each community neighborhood began and ended. It's not that there were any physical barriers, but there were these kind of invisible walls, the ethnic, linguistic, socioeconomic walls, I would call them, barriers, preventing people from really building deep connections. And in my case, it actually took 9/11 when there was tension between the local Pakistani Muslim community and our Jewish school, before my dad helped me start up a Jewish Muslim basketball league. And that was my first real meaningful interaction with anyone who didn't come from an identical community to myself in the beginning of 8th grade. And about 10 years later is when I found myself living in Israel, much better weather, but really similar problems. So here in Israel, we have shared public space between Jews and Arabs, but there's little meaningful interaction. You'll ride the bus together, you'll buy from someone in a store, but you won't really have friends who visit you and share holidays together. And I found myself teaching Model UN to a group of Palestinian Muslim students and a group of Jewish students about 20 minutes away from one another by car. They went to school in different languages, and they had never met someone from the other group, had no friends from the Palestinians from the Jewish group, Jews from the Palestinian group. And what really struck me as I taught them was how similar they were, how I would get the same questions. They had very different political perspectives, but the same kind of questions, the same fears, concerns, trepidations before the first big conference in English and stuff like that. And so in 2012, we had the first conference, and it was a success. And I realized that Model UN was this tool to bring together kids from different communities who were not getting that opportunity in school or anywhere else in society. And since then, I founded Debate for Peace to do that. It's been dozens, maybe hundreds of events, MUN conferences, delegations, meetings with different embassies, and really just creating a safe space for students to talk about anything that they wanted to talk about: religion, politics, Jerusalem, refugees. It didn't matter as long as they could come together. And we'll have these intense debates, and then we'll walk out of the room, and I'll say goodbye to everyone, and they'll go out and have coffee together, because they realize that at the end of the day, they're all teenagers. They're all going through similar issues in school, family. In Luna's case, worrying about climate change and their future, and that they had a lot in common. And I think that really connects us to the SDGs, because obviously diversity is beautiful, and we want to embrace it. But beyond all of our differences, we're all living on the same planet, and we're all invested in the future of that planet. It's just that we have different ways that we think is the best way to get there. And what we want to aspire to at MUN, through MUN and the UN, is using civil debate and negotiations to reach that common goal of the best future for our world. I want to finish with something that I've worked mostly with youth, and I prefer to work with youth. I believe strongly in their creativity, in their energy and their passion, and this is their future. But I also do have to interact with parents a lot, because at the end of the day, they're trusting their most valued possessions with me, especially when we travel abroad. And so I've also talked to dozens of Jewish and Palestinian parents, people who grew up in circumstances totally different from my own, people who grew up in a conflict, people who never had this opportunity to meet someone who shares the same citizenship, lives nearby, but has so many differences from them. From all the parents is the same thing. They just want a brighter future for their kids. They have completely different political perspectives. They have different narratives. They have different collective memories and histories, but they all want a peaceful, successful future for their children, a better world for their children to live in. And so I think it's our goal, whether at the highest level at the UN, in the municipalities, city governments, or us as community activists, it's our goal to break down these hidden barriers, to reach out and to find ways that we can work together, because it's only when we bring together the different communities, the different countries, the different interest groups, then we will solve our problems, whether at the local or at the global level. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen, and I appreciate the passion that you bring to this, and your ability to really try to overcome very significant barriers. And I'm encouraged, as with Luna and James, that you see youth as a major source of progress. In other words, that's where much of this debate, whether it's on climate or it's focusing on education, or it's overcoming social differences and creating a better level of dialogue across barriers in society. The youth are really kind of in a stronger position to contribute to that. So it's not just about youth participation, which risks patronism, being patronizing, but more what are the basis by which youth can take action. So I really appreciate this intervention. I know in the Brooklyn context and Israel, these are two areas where you see this up close and you're able to overcome it. So I want to take a step back. We've had a number of presentations. Sorry, my video is off. Apologies. I was just trying to make sure that Stephen had good connection. I'm back. We have limited time. We had booked for this session, in fact, a very short period of time. So I'd hope to generate a longer Q&A, but I think what I'll try to do is provide some synthesis remarks in the interest of time, and simply indicate that I'm seeing a couple of trends across these different geographies and different aspects of the SDGs under the common rubrics of sustainable development, and specifically looking at urban aspects of that. I think one takeaway is that a lot of us are trying to use build, support, strengthen networks. And those can be among youth, neighborhood exchanges, neighborhood-based knowledge, cities, as we saw with a Resilient Cities Network, and as well the voluntary local reviews that Aissata had mentioned at the beginning. These kinds of networks and using the platforms that we have available, which I think in many ways COVID-19 has forced us to use in a way that we hadn't before, how to strengthen and utilize those. All of the interventions we've heard today, all the presentations, are relying on some form of networking. And I think what's important for us is to think about how we go further in that direction, and also look at the cross-fertilization of networks, and not necessarily operate purely as youth, purely as neighborhoods, purely as cities. That how do we look at the interchange among the networks for furthering the respective efforts of each of the networks. For example, we've had long discussions with voluntary local reviews. Luis and I have had that. Aissata and Penny, the commissioner, and I have had these discussions regarding how do we make sure that the voluntary local reviews benefit from greater interaction with neighborhoods and their organizations. How do we have voluntary local reviews that bring in the perspective of youth, so that youth are very much a part of that interpretation of how the city anchors SDGs. I know this is already happening, but it's worth, I think, exploring more and then looking at the networks to make that possible. I think a second takeaway is despite working in networks all over the world, each of those networks are grounded in place. And I think as Eugene had indicated, his takeaway from analysis of the resilient cities and the resilient cities officers was that common was a place-based strategy, people-based, and of course, looking at resilience from the perspective of urban. And I think this is very powerful, and this is what's come out in COVID-19. Almost all of the initiatives that we've heard today have very much had a place-based approach, so that what's happening with COVID and really with the inequalities that COVID has elevated, how it's affecting particular areas. So we have these networks, but they're also grounded in place. A third observation is that in each of these networks, there's real need for tools, that each of the place-based approaches, regardless of where one is in the world, are generating tools and practices that are making a difference at the local level. And I think what particularly Luis and Eugene, but also others, are doing is trying to aggregate those tools and practices and develop some systemic tools that can be applied almost anywhere. Of course, they're adapted and grounded based on the local context, but there are a set of tools that are essentially inductively being built up from the practical experience and made available to others. And this feeds into the networks, so that when the networks are strong and there is that information exchange, the tools can be available. So if a new city joins, for example, voluntary local reviews and wants to know how it's done, there are a set of tools that are available to do that. Same thing with resilience strategies, same thing with neighborhood-based planning. So I think the tool piece is really important. And of course, tied to tools is data. And data is being generated in each of these networks, not necessarily shared, but increasingly available on public platforms, again, that are accessible. I think the other takeaway for me, shifting more to the education front, is, as we learned from James, a deeper understanding of causation. What is it that's preventing people from realizing their productive potential, their contribution to society, their potential leadership, and where does education fit in that? It's not just education alone. There are so many other factors that are linked to preventing people from attaining the education. And even when they have the education, they're trying to overcome social barriers and contexts in which they are limited because of where they come from or what they believe in, etc. How do those things get unlocked for the purposes of leadership? And I think James really captured that well in terms of his approach and what that organization is doing in Uganda. In terms of the food, I just mentioned that together to just when Sada was finishing, but this ability to use existing resources, existing restaurants, existing food, existing networks of community organizations and food banks. How can we take advantage of those existing structures to address food shortages and also prevent food loss and waste? And then layered on top of that in the context of COVID, where restaurants are really hit hard, as are small entrepreneurs throughout the city. How can that be addressed? Lastly, with the interventions of Stephen, this is a challenge in many ways to our thinking of place-based approaches. What Stephen is putting his finger on, I think, is yes, people-centered action, place-based, grounded in data, grounded in human agency is terrific. But if those places are unable to communicate other than exchanging strategies on networks, that they actually can't interact with one another, then there's a real limitation there. And if that distinction between different places is bounded by not physical walls, but as Stephen said, invisible walls, where the level of interaction is not very meaningful, then how is that addressed? How do we also deal with that issue? And what are some ways to bring folks together in a way where they, while maintaining their differences and sense of identity, have the ability to address common problems? And as I think he put it very well, there's no parent that doesn't want a better future for their children. And if that's one of the major driving forces that allows parents to get involved, and youth are not really caught up in these distinctions because they are also themselves, dealing with their own challenges as young people, and really don't see the boundaries as sharply as older people, then how do we take advantage of that exchange, that intergenerational conversation, to allow us to overcome some of these, as was said, invisible walls. So a lot to take in one session on World Cities Day, and I'm sorry that this was not an exchange, that I was just had to provide some synthesis. But I hope in my synthesis I've demonstrated that there is I think a level of momentum that COVID-19 has produced, but also some continued challenges, and that we can use these kinds of exchanges on this celebration of World Cities Day to take them further. I would like to end by having people look through the chat. There are a lot of resources that various speakers put up and people working with them. I think they offer a valuable resource for people that would like to take these ideas further. Each of the presenters kind of gave a snapshot of what they could talk about for hours. So if you want to follow up with them, their contacts are available. And I think we'll be sending out an email to all the participants on this so that they can have the basis for follow-up with individual speakers and or UN Habitat as a convener. So with those comments, Naomi and Tina, is there any other issues that we would want to touch on? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. The only comment I'll make is that this entire meeting has been recorded and it will be included in our follow-up to all of the attendees and presenters. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, and have a nice day.